from your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday, July 3rd, as we bring you a new episode a day before 4th of July 2023. There's some good things happening with the White Sox. Luis Robert Jr. earns his first All-Star appearance and could start the game, deciding on how Dusty Baker handles Aaron Judge's situation. Zach Remillard continues to be helpful for the White Sox, and Eloy Jimenez is getting hot at the plate. And man, those three topics could take up half the show, but those three positive items are not painting the whole picture when it comes to the Chicago White Sox. Despite scoring 18 runs over the weekend against Oakland, the White Sox lost the series. They lost a series to an Oakland A's team that is going to struggle to win 50 games this season. Now it's baseball. Weird and bad things happen over a 162-game season. But for a White Sox team desperately trying to make up the gap in the American League Central, they needed this series win. And now there's more bad injury news as Michael Kopech is actually hurt and not tired, which leaves the White Sox with just 3 starting pitchers, at least until the All-Star break. Joining me now is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. And hello, Jim. Sunday was a good day for the White Sox, but the weekend overall was very disappointing.
Sure was, especially since they lost the middle game. The game Dylan Cease starting against Oakland's former opening day starter, current starter with an 8 ERA. Especially, they in the first game, Jesse Scholtens and Tanner Banks teamed up. Did not pitch that well, but Grifol decided to kind of eat the game by having Scholtens throw the 8th inning, when maybe if they were trailing by 1 or tied game, he would have gone a different pitcher. But that made sense because they had another bullpen game on Sunday. They had a game they probably expected to win on Saturday. And so managing that game, not to lose or, they're trying to win, obviously, but just, managing resource allocation, prioritizing that over winning that game. It makes sense if you win on Saturday, and they did not. And I think that's the one game you look at and say, what happened? Especially they blew 2 leads. They had their rested bullpen lined up the way they wanted it, and still a really disappointing loss.
And then Sunday was tricky because they were up 8-3, and then it was suddenly 8-5, and suddenly it was 8-7, and Clint Frazier made it an adventure on the final out, which he misplayed the previous fly ball hit to him, but at least he caught that to preserve the win for the White Sox. They allowed 7 runs in every game to Oakland, the worst offense in Major League Baseball. And the Oakland Athletics scored 7 runs in each of these games. And it just has me wondering, and this is a good time to bring in the injury news. Michael Kopech going on the 15-day injured list with shoulder inflammation. So he's not tired. Mm-hmm. There's something that's been going on with Kopech. And since his last start, where he threw over 100 pitches, he got to the 5th inning. He could not complete the 5th inning. Now the White Sox have found something to put him on the injured list. It sounds like that they're hopeful that with the stint on the injured list through the All-Star break, with the rest, that Michael Kopech could rejoin the White Sox rotation, maybe make a start against the Atlanta Braves in the first series after the All-Star break. But I remember that Ethan Katz wanted to slap Michael Kopech back in the 5th starter spot after the All-Star break, which would actually push that next start back from Michael Kopech in Queens when the White Sox faced the New York Mets. But in this upcoming homestand, it's 6 games. The White Sox only have 3 starting pitchers, and you're going to continue to run out bullpen games. At some point, Jim, this pitching staff is going to gas out. They're going to get tired. You don't have a lot of depth in Charlotte. I mean, I know that it sounds like we're a broken record, folks, because we keep talking about the lack of pitching depth in Charlotte. But this week, and maybe even this past weekend against Oakland, could be a sign that while the White Sox pitching has been a lot better, they are showing signs of fatigue. and it's costing them games. It's costing them series that they need to win.
Yes, that was the problem with how they played in April and May when, April was terrible, May was okay, but they lost some winnable games in May, didn't make up the ground they needed to make, and they had basically perfect pitching health. They had all their starters making all the starts. Bullpen was pretty much in shape. Joe Kelly missed a little bit of time, but otherwise they had the relievers they wanted, aside from like Liam Hendricks and Joe Kelly for a spell. And still, 8 wins in April. And they've been like hovering around a dozen games under 500 the whole time. And now here comes the pitching depth problem. Like, it'd be one thing if they were around 500, and then here comes a tough week with bullpen games against good teams and 2 starters you're hoping to get back after the All-Star break. Given that Davis Martin is out, Sean Burke has been hurt, Jesse Schultens is basically like who they're relying on from Charlotte. Like, yep, this was the 2 tough weeks you're going to have to endure because you didn't have the pitching depth built up, but they've gotten that point and they're 12 games under 500 or thereabouts. Sometimes they're 10 games, sometimes they're 13 games, but just, 12, a dozen is a nice number to go by because it sounds like, solidly double digits, not just 10, could be 9. That's what makes the April so tough, the way they lost it. They had everybody they wanted making starts and could not win games. And now they have to win games with their offense. And they struggled to do that in Oakland, even though like Oakland tried with some of the walks they were giving up and the pitchers they were running out and the lack of pitching depth they have. Like, they dared the White Sox to win games with the offense. They only won 1. They could have won the first game. Could have been a slugfest. Couldn't capitalize with the bases loaded. Second game, they scored 6 runs, almost scored 10, about a foot away from Tim Anderson doing so. But still, like late innings, Pedro Grifol once again kind of subbed himself into a corner and could not have the firepower he wanted to score runs in extra innings. And now you have real opponents coming up again with real depth who are actually trying to win and not trying to relocate their team. And now you don't have 2 starters and it gets a lot tougher. They had Brian Shaw and Gregory Santos closing it out, and they had Lucas Giolito warming up in the bullpen for an inning on his side day. Like, this is not great. And if they look this shaky against Oakland, like, I think they were hoping that they could get by with 2 bullpen games in Oakland, see how it goes, but they really didn't. And now it gets tough. And who knows if they really planned for that.
I mean, they're going to have a bullpen game. We'll talk about this later in the show against Toronto. They may have to have 2 bullpen games against St. Louis. And the Cardinals have not been playing very good baseball this season. They've been underwhelming, just as underwhelming as the Chicago White Sox.
They're like the NL White Sox.
Yeah, the NL White Sox. So maybe you could get away with it. Maybe. But like, to the overall point, the White Sox are 37-49. In their last 10 games, they're 5-5. So they've been 500 last 10 games. So have the Minnesota Twins. So in the last 10 games, you have made up no ground on the Minnesota Twins. You are running out of time to catch the Twins and try to get yourself back up to 500 because the trade deadline looms large. And so does the Major League Baseball draft. And I know that's a big focal point for a lot of front offices entering this week. And everyone is going to be in their respective war rooms. You'll have all the front office executives. And while they are focused on draft talk and draft strategy, with everybody in the room at the same time, this is also a wonderful opportunity for baseball organizations to decide in which direction we are going to go in with the trade deadline looming in a couple of weeks. Like, after this draft, do we send scouts out to either scout prospects that we want to acquire if we're going to sell, or do we need to send them out to major league locations to get a couple more looks in person of targets that the front office has identified that they want to be buyers and try to acquire these types of players? That's what's going to happen here, especially after the All-Star break. And again, with everybody in the same room, teams have this opportunity. So this is a really important week upcoming for the White Sox. And you know, with Grifol, and you mentioned Saturday, like managing himself out of a bench. I am really getting tired of the whole, you know what, I am going to pitch run for Eloy Jimenez in the 8th inning because no way does his spot come up again later in the game for Clint Frazier. And what happened? Eloy's spot comes up. Doesn't have Clint Frazier hit. No, he ends up having Gavin Sheets hit for him. So you have Clint Frazier, who is a slightly faster runner than Eloy Jimenez. And after Sunday's game, I'm not quite sure he's that much better of a defender in right field. Be a defensive replacement for the 8th inning, and then you have Gavin Sheets hit for him in the 9th inning. So that's how you use that one bench guy, as a defensive replacement in the 8th inning. And then you have Elvis Andrus come in the game, and in extra innings, Yasmani Grandal's batting, and if he gets on base, great, but you don't have anyone that can run for him because you just burned your bench. I'm just having a hard time following the logic and some of the in-game decision-making by Pedro Grifol. So there's just a lot going on right now that's giving me bad vibes with the White Sox, and especially after this weekend, and I was not expecting that. I thought with the good vibes that they established in the last 2 games against the Angels, Jim, scoring 11 runs, scoring 9 runs, it could carry over to Oakland. And they did. They scored 18 runs in 3 games against the Athletics. That should be good enough to win that series. But it's not. And they have a losing road trip out west. You know, that's nothing new. They go 3-4. But man, everyone else in this division has been beating up on the Oakland A's. And if you're the one AL Central team that can't beat the Oakland A's, that might be the deciding factor here. And it's just a missed opportunity for the White Sox. It's another missed opportunity for the White Sox.
I think when it comes to Grifol emptying his bench, I think the easiest way I can explain it is that he seems to think, what if this works? And he never thinks, what if this doesn't work? And it keeps not working. He seems like he manages for the best case scenario of this guy delivers this hit. This guy scores from first on a ball to the gap that doesn't get to the wall. He has these visions of mind of how it might work, but then he always ends up so many defensive replacements hitting for themselves. I really want my idea of a defensive replacement wearing a neon green jersey, just so when he comes up to the plate, we know he shouldn't be hitting. The manager made a mistake. Just color him in highlighter just to show the risk that Grifol is taking on.
Just wait until the 9th inning for your defensive replacements when you have the lead. I'm with you. He's been making these decisions in the 7th and 8th inning that nothing is going to go wrong. We're totally going to have the lead in the 9th inning. And maybe that is just a philosophical difference between how I view things in life and maybe Pedro Grifol viewed things in life. I'm always one to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's what influences my decision making, is that what if something goes wrong? My decisions are going to be influenced in what we could do to prepare, so we'll be fine if things go wrong. And if the things that could go wrong don't happen, then we're in a great situation. But Pedro Grifol has said that he's an optimist, and he's making some decisions here that, to your point, Jim, they can't fail because they're not going to fail. Why would I make this decision or strategize or come up with a strategy if it could possibly fail? I should always have the mindset this is always going to totally work. But when it doesn't work, it just puts the White Sox in a really bad situation. And I think the best managers, no matter what it is in life, 9-to-5 jobs or in professional sports, are ones that can manage all kinds of risk in that particular moment. And as a rookie manager, this is where I think Grifol is really struggling and it's impacting the White Sox on the field.
You can look at him as an optimist. Sometimes they're pessimistic in terms of defensive replacements. What if Eloy screws up in right field in the 8th inning? I'm going to feel so bad about that. Some of it seems like it's fear-based.
Okay, I can see that.
Depending on how you look at it, it just seems like he wants to manage the game to win, or he wants to win the game by managing. And it's a little bit, even then, that's not really logically consistent with the way Grifol operates otherwise, because like Tim Anderson being first or second in the lineup the whole time, that's like a belief in Tim Anderson. And that's an unshakable belief that he's going to resemble the guy that he's always been soon enough, and hasn't happened yet. There were some signs of life from Anderson this weekend. I guess we'll find out whether that's Oakland pitching doing it for him or just himself.
Right.
Like that's why this is a hard weekend to feel great about the way he played, but there were some signs of life. I'm interested in seeing if he carries over to Toronto. But there's just this faith that Anderson's going to be the guy and that they need him to be there because the White Sox operate best when he's the straw that stirs the drink at the top of the order, which sure, understandable. But then like that belief does not extend to a bunch of other guys that, should be in the game, just whether it's Eloy and Wright or Eloy running or like Sebi Zavala, his defense being better than his offense and having Grandal come in and just all sorts of situations, making these unnecessary changes that really thin out the bench and reduce like having Yasmani Grandal come up in the 9th if they need him versus in the 7th when, he's trying to score a runner from first with 2 outs. That's, I think what I don't get from Grifol is just, I think if I'm trying to boil it down, it would be like, he wants to go to sleep at night knowing like that he made every move he could. And I think he makes every move he can pretty much every single game where they're trailing. And I think that just shows, do it once, like, okay, do it, every, 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. That's just an aggressive manager. Doing it like multiple times a week just smacks of desperation, I think.
I'm expecting Rick Hahn to speak to the media on Tuesday to report the injury news and the latest updates, not just on Michael Kopech, but Yohan Moncada was seen pregame fielding some grounders at third base. We are expecting some type of update on Mike Clevenger's situation as well. When Hahn does speak about Michael Kopech, is there anything that he could say that you will buy his reasoning and be like, okay, yes, I could understand the White Sox had no idea that Michael Kopech actually had inflammation in his shoulder? Because this injury news just makes it feel like you knew. Like, you knew something physically was wrong. You try to pitch the idea that, we're trying to manage his innings. He may be tired. Like, this is the 3rd straight podcast we're talking about Michael Kopech and his workload, because now he's on the injured list. And it's like the same thing with Garrett Crochet. Grifol goes out to the mound. Are you okay? Oh, he says he's okay. Well, he must be okay. He's clearly not okay. He's on the injured list with shoulder inflammation. Like, I don't know if there's anything that Hahn can say to make me believe or take his word for granted, I guess. That like, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense, Rick. Because, again, the White Sox have been so weird with injuries as of late. I don't know why they're just not straightforward or forthcoming to tell the media and fans, actually, this is what's going on. This is a concern. This is why we're shutting this guy down.
First of all, are shoulders the new hamstrings in terms of
I don't know
how many they've had? Crochet and Kopech and Romy and Tim Anderson, like all 4 of them with vague shoulder injuries. So yeah, I mean, there isn't a whole lot of faith in just their ability to identify shoulder injuries. Like Romy Gonzalez dealing with on and off inflammation. Now he's on the 60-day IL. Maybe they just want to keep paying him and just say like, we like you as a person. Here's extra service time when, we might have optioned you down to Charlotte because Zach Remillard's playing really well. Yeah, I don't quite know. And I think it comes down to like, it might be salvageable if the All-Star break comes and goes and Kopech is on schedule and remains on schedule for like 3 or 4 weeks. And then, who knows what happens, in terms of pitcher durability, and who knows also what happens by the All-Star break and what the White Sox choose to do and what arms they do have around and how they are, whether they're scraping for innings or acquired guys who might be able to take some starts and, shuffle things around. But if this is if shoulder inflammation is a scary way of saying like, yeah, there was some fatigue led to inflammation and it needs to calm down, but we think it will. And he makes the start, the 5th day after the All-Star break. Not great, but fine. if they were resting him for fatigue, it'd look the same way. But there's no reason to believe them in the interim. It's basically like 2 weeks of having to say like, I don't believe you, or show not tell when it comes to Kopech. And like, that's just the way they've done it the last few years with injuries. And, Moncada's another one in which he played looking like nothing like his usual self for weeks. And, finally putting him on the IL with, a back problem, like whether it's shoulders, backs, we saw with Robert's wrist last year, Larry Garcia's back issue. I thought Tony La Russa was a disconnect between the manager seat and the training room and the front office and whatnot. But yeah, especially since they hired new trainers too. Like they bolstered the coaching.
Jeff Head.
Yeah. And some, strength and conditioning guys too below him. Like they added them, and like still this fundamental denial of injuries or underperformance due to apparent injuries until it finally, bites them. It remains. And there are just too many of these to where like you should believe him on Kopech. I mean, that's I guess how I'm taking it. Like I can see a situation where it's not that big of a deal, where Kopech still reaches like 150 innings at the end of the year. But based on precedent, not necessarily Kopech, but everybody else, like, yeah, he might, who knows, he might have like 20 innings left him, and then that's barely gets to 100 based on the way they've handled things.
Yeah, the trend has been White Sox player goes on injured list, they should be back in 10, 15 days. Rarely the case. Like they're gone weeks after the 10 or 15 days. How long has Clevenger been out?
Yeah, it's going to be like a month.
Yeah, it's got to be a month. Yohan Moncada, we still do not have a clear timetable for him. We don't have a clear timetable for Liam Hendricks. Well, they said 3 to 4 weeks. They have not established a timeline for Garrett Crochet. I think that is smart on their half. I will give them credit for that, because it might be more serious of a shoulder inflammation situation for Garrett Crochet than it is for Michael Kopech. It's just like, this is one of my complaints about the White Sox front office. I would just like them to be a little bit more forthcoming here, because you pitch this idea that, well, Michael Kopech is tired and we want to manage his workload and give him extra rest. And then, before Sunday's game, by the way, Michael Kopech has to go on the injured list. Like, it just makes it seem like, and the injured list is not a friendly place for White Sox players. It just gives White Sox fans like gloom because of what happens when guys go on the injured list. They could be gone for the rest of the season. We may not see them again. And that could really complicate matters. So I'm hopeful Kopech could return to the White Sox rotation shortly after the All-Star break. But my expectations are it might be longer than that if the inflammation doesn't calm down over the All-Star break. And then what? You can't keep going with the 3-man rotation. I mean, the White Sox are not the Tampa Bay Rays. Like,
Chuck
they
Tanner
don't have
could.
this figured out.
Wilbur Wood and Tom Bradley, like, bring them back.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I'm sure they also pitched through shoulder inflammation and couldn't pick anything up after age 40 in their lifetime because they threw so much. But,
it's not great. I envy what the Detroit Tigers do for their media. Like, I don't know if you've seen those like injury releases that they do. Like,
yeah, it's
pages
very extensive.
Long. Yeah, extensive. Like, just pitcher is dealing with shoulder inflammation. He's expected to start throwing again in 1 week. A timetable for a rehab assignment will be forthcoming. Somebody just reported to Toledo for a rehab assignment. We expect him to be back in 4 days. Like, it's very thorough in terms of whether they have timetables or not. Every player who is injured or currently, I think they have a major league and a minor league one. And it seems like it would take up, maybe Rick Hahn prefers talking about injuries to everything else he could be asked about. So it's a way to like kind of take up 7 minutes of his media session by giving all the injury updates that this Tigers press release takes care of. But as somebody writing about them, as somebody documenting injuries, it would really be cool to see that. I'm not sure if that's a Scott Harris thing, of new general manager in town, preferring to release the information that way so he doesn't have to talk about it and just tasks the communications department with informing the reporters. But I very much envy that as somebody who would like to keep track. And like when somebody asks or tweets us like, hey, what's happening with Garrett Crochet? Like we could actually say like, oh, according to this date, which is, last Friday, and they always release them on a Friday. They said this, and I guess we'll find out next Friday if there's any update to that condition.
The White Sox hate when people from the outside speculate about their business, but they do a terrible job of communicating. So all that leaves for people outside of the White Sox business is to speculate in what is going on at 35th and Shields. And I don't think they understand that. They've been doing this for so long. I really don't think they are self-aware to understand they continue to do this. And now we wait.
Yeah, or they just like complaining.
That's true. They might. Now we wait and see how Giolito, Cease, and Lynn hold up. And they're going to have to hold up because the White Sox don't have depth. This is it. 3-man rotation going into this week. We'll see how they do. Jim and I are going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, again, there are some good things that have happened for the White Sox over the weekend, and we will talk about that. Luis Robert going to the All-Star game. Does Zach Remillard have staying power? And Eloy Jimenez is hot at the plate. Next on the Sox Machine podcast. I'm sure many of you had this debate with significant others and friends about how fashionable cargo shorts are. As someone who has fought these battles and has been willing to die on the hill about the benefits of cargo shorts, I found a new light. In my attempts to get into more shape, I've lost a couple of pants short sizes, so it was time for a new wardrobe fix, and I discovered an apparel company called Bird Dogs. They make a wide range of gear, but they get high marks for their shorts. After receiving a pair, I understand the hype. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts have a slimmer fit, so it's more in line with today's fashion trends. It gives legs a sculpted look, but it's still a great fit around the waist, so I don't feel constricted. That's because Bird Dog shorts are not made with stiff, restricted cotton. Bird Dogs invented a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but it stretches to get you a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement, which is key for me. I want to look fashionable, but in a practical way. It's going to get hot in Chicago, I promise you. And if you are like me, wanting to up your shorts game, check out Bird Dogs. Right now, they're running a special. When you make your order at birddogs.com, use promo code POOL at checkout to receive a free Yeti-style tumbler. Again, the URL is birddogs.com/pool. Use promo code POOL at checkout for that gift. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, let's talk about the good things for the Chicago White Sox. The big one, Luis Robert Jr. is officially an All-Star. He gets the nod. He'll be joining the American League All-Star team in Seattle after this homestand. It's well-deserved. Over the weekend, he went 5 for 12 against the Oakland Athletics. He had a home run. He walked 3 times. Hey, now, that's a good sign. In the last 15 games, just stupid numbers from Luis Robert. 7 home runs, 10 RBIs, hitting .351 with a .431 on base percentage, slugging .772. Now, according to Fangraphs, this is going to surprise a lot of people. When it comes to wins above replacement, Luis Robert Jr. is at 3.7. He's currently tied with Mookie Betts and Wander Franco for 4th best overall wins above replacement in Major League Baseball. Now, Shohei Ohtani is by far and away number 1, and he is having a historic season. But we're talking about Luis Robert Jr. firmly now in the top 10 of all players in Major League Baseball with the way that he's been performing. And we've been raving about how Robert has really hit a groove. And I think, the All-Star, it's always cool to see when you go to Baseball Reference, when you look at somebody's career and you see the All-Star game appearances. And in a recent episode, we talked about how Luis Robert is living up to the hype. And Jim, he gets the All-Star star now on Baseball Reference for his page, and it's well-deserved.
Yeah, a deserving one, not a we needed one representative from the White Sox.
Right.
Luis Robert is the closest thing to one. which I think was my fear, like probably in early May or like first half of May, was looking at this roster and saying like, ugh, is Jake Berger going to be the best all-star case, or is it going to be like Kendall Graveman or Joe Kelly's getting hot? There's your all-star. And like nobody really cares about relievers getting all-star bids. Like maybe Liam Hendricks at his peak, getting an all-star nod and cursing on the live mic and closing it out. Like that's what you want to see. But like Kendall Graveman is not Liam Hendricks in terms of reputation, in terms of like, how a different manager would treat him in the late innings. Like Liam Hendricks gets the ball, Kendall Graveman does not in that situation. And just like charity and the charity that makes everybody feel a little bit disgusted with themselves. Like it's not really appreciated. It's just, league said we had to. Here you go, Kendall. No, Roberts, he's one of the best players in the league. And, we've talked about that. He's not a perfect player, but his strengths are so strong that the weakness is you can shrug away. And, as we look towards whatever the next White Sox roster is going to be, the job of whoever is going to be leading that charge has to find players who can supplement that weakness. But like, it reminds me a little bit of Jose Abreu, except Jose Abreu, who's really fast and can play center field in terms of just like, he's going to have some at-bats that frustrate you from time to time, but the talent just wins out at the end of the day. And it's so, for a White Sox team that has just not had talent, to see Roberts command all of it is really, it's a reason to go to the ballpark. When otherwise there really might not be. Eloy Jimenez is on a nice little run. Dylan Cease and Lucas Giolito give good efforts, but when it comes to just who's going to, make my jaw drop, or who's going to, who am I going to pin hopes on? Like it's Roberts, and that's kind of it, especially if you consider defense as well.
Yeah, we talked about in the last podcast episode, where would the White Sox be without Luis Robert? Like the offense has been struggling. They've been performing well in the last 5 games, but overall in the first half of the season, they have been struggling. And yeah, without Luis Robert, the season would be over for the White Sox.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, Shohei Ohtani, assuming he stays healthy, knock on wood, because it's fun as hell watching him play. But like, he's going to be the unanimous MVP. Yeah. Assuming he like has a decent second half, especially if the Angels are like over 500 or around 500 and making a run at it. With Robert, like say if it were a case where Ohtani's having like a pedestrian season and like it's actually a race, like Robert would be hammered by the valuable argument, by the voters who do not look at it as best player, but look at it as valuable, because like, where would the White Sox be without Luis Roberts? Like, well, they could be 12 games under 500 with anybody. They could be, out of the race since April with anybody. What has Robert done? And so I'm kind of thankful that Ohtani's having the season we had, just so we don't have a high risk of being inundated with those arguments of best versus valuable, which I think are extremely annoying.
I did put up this show poll on Twitter, which we all know and how well Twitter's been working as of late. The show poll was over under total wins for the White Sox in 2023, 72.5 wins. And out of the people that voted in the Twitter poll, 68% took the under for the White Sox, thinking that they're going to lose at least 90 games this season, with only 32% believing the White Sox will avoid the 90 losses. And I think that happens if Luis Robert could play the entire season, Jim. If something were to happen, knock on wood, it does not happen for Luis Robert, and he does play the entire season, I do think that the White Sox can avoid 90 losses. But man, the more I think about it, just like trying to imagine where this White Sox team would be without Luis Robert. Like Jake Berger, according to wins above replacement, is the second best position player that the White Sox currently have. I think the way that Andrew Benintendi has been playing ever since he's been batting leadoff for the White Sox in the last few weeks, and even extended over to the last month, I think that he has become the second most valuable position player that the White Sox have. But that's a big drop off from where Luis Robert is down to Andrew Benintendi. And I've got this feeling that even if the White Sox can avoid 90 losses, Jim, it's going to be weird to see a 7-WAR Luis Robert Jr. season and the White Sox are like 74 and 88. It's like, what a waste.
Yeah. I was thinking about the question too, and I think 68% said, under 20 or under 72 wins. And I think, it comes down to, how they act at the trade deadline. If they sell, if Lucas Giolito goes, if Dylan Cease goes, I would, I don't see how they go over. If they lose the guys who have been the only thing keeping them afloat, is Andrew Vaughn suddenly going to become fast or something like the players who have been, is Andrew Benintendi going to hit 15 homers? Are all the guys who have been limited by just their natural positives and negatives, their strengths and weaknesses? We're seeing 40th percentiles across the board, I think, when it comes to the White Sox offense and pitching staff. With Lance Lynn, I would say it's 20th. But the guys, if they trade the guys who are overperforming or performing just fine, have trade value because of the way they've played, I don't see how they get to 72.
Yeah, that's depressing as hell. Something that's not depressing, Zach Remillard. He continues to be useful, Jim. So in this 3-game series, Remillard goes 3 for 8 because he walked 4 times. So 3 base hits, 4 walks, got on base 7 times in this series, which is fantastic. Ever since he's joined the White Sox, he's 15 for 38 with 6 walks and 8 RBIs, which means that Remillard's hitting .395 with a .489 on base percentage, and he's slugging .474. There's not a lot of pop in the bat for Zach Remillard. Definitely not home run power. I say that and now watch him hit 4 home runs this upcoming homestand. It's more double, it's more gap to gap, it's more hustle double power for Zach Remillard. Mm-hmm. However, the White Sox desperately needing hot hands to help support Luis Robert and Andrew Benintendi because so many guys in his lineup could really go cold. We have talked about it many times about just all these options they have thrown at second base and nobody is sticking for the White Sox. Well, here's Remillard. He's been very useful since that Seattle series, pretty much winning that game for the White Sox coming off the bench, and he continues to be useful. The question that I've been posed on social media, and I want to get your thoughts, Jim, is about staying power. Mm-hmm. Is this for real, or is this a Danny Mendick 2.0 that we're talking about when watching Remillard?
I don't think it's for real. I'd like to say it's for real because I don't know if you've heard this from me, but he played his high school ball in Troy, a Capital Region guy.
You're becoming the Charlie Tilson when it comes to Zach Remillard. Did you know that Charlie Tilson played high school ball in Chicago?
Yeah, he's my former local product. I have to tout that. But no, I think 2 things that jump out to me. Positive, negative. Positive is that he has an idea of the strike zone. And part of me wonders, again, as we mentioned with Tim Anderson, Oakland series, Oakland pitching staff, the Oakland pitching staff meets somebody like Zach Remillard halfway. Kind of like the way Jesse Schultens meets Oakland's lineup halfway and Tanner Banks does, to where if they break a drought of 10 hit games or 10 hits in a game because they get those hits off Tanner Banks and Jesse Schultens, that's not really an insult. That's guys they have the best chance of hitting. So, hey, good for them. They did it. Same with Zach Remillard. If he's having a good series against Oakland, he should, because that pitching should kind of look familiar to him. I don't know, the Norfolk pitching staff, a really good AAA team, Durham, the Tampa Bay prospects they run out there. He might have seen relatively equal pitching staffs in the International League. So he should, have the kind of series where he's drawing walks and getting on base because he's just has some semblance of an idea. So there's that. I think the thing I like about him is he does provide a little bit of a control in terms of here's a guy with decent plate discipline. Here's how, if he's drawing walks and nobody else is, and he shouldn't scare any pitcher, what are we doing with the rest of our lineup? What are we doing with just our development and the players we evaluate, the players we bring in the organization? Maybe we should have a real heart-to-heart talk among ourselves about just, we can't keep going on like this. If Zach Remillard can walk laps around the rest of the lineup just by being somebody who can lay off 2 pitches out of the zone in a row. So that I like, and that feels somewhat sustainable. I think just the lack of power and the lack of pop, I think ultimately those guys end up getting the bats knocked out of their hands. And even this 2-run single was deflected, a pinball one off the left side of the infield.
It was, yeah.
And put the ball in play, hit it reasonably hard, but still just more about placement than about exit velocity. And, Ozzie Guillen will say, he shows you don't need exit velocity, but time shows, that just you can't get by in weak singles all the time. Like Luis Arias is an exception for a reason. Like he's just all about, even if he doesn't have, power in the classic sense, like he has barrel control. He gets barrels to balls and just can redirect them in all sorts of crazy ways. Whereas, Remillard is not Luis Arias. So, that's why I doubt he has staying power. But the thing that, I wrote about this saying that you really can't think that far ahead with the crisis the White Sox are in with the infield. Tim Anderson being, having weak pulse right now. Elvis Andrus, like that error in the in extra innings, like that's a case of like, why are you even here? Like if you're making rookie mistakes in games that you need to win and your OPS starts with a 5, like what's the point? Why are you getting at bats here? He's like the infield Clint Frazier, I think, in which if they made a roster move tomorrow, like, I get it. There's just, it's not, there seems to be nothing there. Remillard just coming in and providing any kind of competency. I would say enjoy every game it happens. And if it happens 2 games in a row, like be happy fourfold, because it just, it's kind of exponential happiness in terms of him delivering, because they had so many options going into the season about second and third base with Lenyn Sosa and Romy Gonzalez, Elvis Andrus, Jose Rodriguez, if he was healthy from the get-go. And like Zach Remillard's a guy stepping up. Like on one hand, like that's not good, but as long as he's delivering, like great. Don't ask questions. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, etc. Just appreciate every game it's happening. Be wary that it might, be wary of the threat that he might go into a really quiet slump where he has a lot of 0 for 4s with no strikeouts, but just like he's just hitting routine outs the way Tim Anderson kind of is right now with, ground balls left side and line drives always to the same spot to right field. That's kind of my fear with Remillard, but for the time being, great. Keep it up. Go Troy.
Yeah. Flavor of the month. That's the way I described it. And the White Sox have had this over the last couple of years. Like somebody surprises you, they have a hot month, and people think they got staying power, and then they fizzle. So I'm with you, Jim. But he's got a hot hand. He should be in the lineup. Keep him in the lineup, Pedro. You said that when you got hired, you play the hot hands, and you kind of do that. Continue to play Zach Remillard at second base until he hits that cold streak. You don't got anyone else right now that is threatening Remillard's playing time.
Well, and 2021 was built on these hot streaks. Yermin Mercedes to Jake Lamb to Gavin Sheets to Adam Engel to Jake Berger, like all these like great 2 weeks back to back to back. Like, Zach Remillard is providing that kind of impact. But unfortunately, like everything the White Sox needed from those guys were pretty much concentrated to right field and DH. And right now, there are so many problems that Zach Remillard, like he solves second base, but third base when Jake Berger is really struggling, shortstop when Tim Anderson's really struggling, right field when there might not be anybody, like when Gavin Sheets is your best option, goes on and on and on. And that's, Remillard does not have that kind of impact to give like a 2021 type boost, but he's just one man.
And then finally, Eloy, he's hot at the plate. He had a home run, 5 RBIs against the Athletics over the weekend. He did leave Sunday's game early due to general unspecified soreness. Who knows? Again, revisiting the conversation we had about the White Sox and how they handle injuries earlier in the show. In his last 7 games, he's 11 for 29 with 2 homers and 8 RBIs, hitting .379 with a .419 on-base percentage, slugging .655. Offensively, if Robert continues his hot streak, and if Eloy is fine, now I think you got something cooking here. You got a stew cooking here, Jim, with Robert and Jimenez going back-to-back in the lineup. And I think we have seen in the last 7 days and in this series and even during the road trip, Andrew Vaughn can be a nice hitter. Someone that has a 115 weighted runs created plus. And he could pull through for you with the 2 RBI singles or finding a RBI double into the gap. But Eloy, I think, could be should be on a different level offensively from the Andrew Vaughn. And that's why he is the prototype cleanup hitter for the White Sox. And the way that he's been barreling up the ball, I've just got a feeling like Luis Robert has been red hot. If Eloy's fine, and it is truly just general soreness and he doesn't need like a spleen removed, then
all the vestigial organs.
Yeah. Then if Eloy could get hot, then I think this White Sox offense could have a chance to be very competitive in the month of July.
I think if Eloy gets hot and he stays hot, do they trade him? That'd be an interesting case of like, deal him while he's fully healthy.
I haven't thought about that.
But let's say like his contract runs long enough to where like, if it's Robert and Vaughn are playing well enough, I think that makes the case for not tearing it down, like maybe like selling the expiring contracts or whatnot. But in terms of like a complete teardown where you have like another multi-stage rebuild, I think they're the argument. We have a core of the lineup already here. We have, under controlled costs for the next few years. Like, let's go the Brewers model of just trying to mix and match and get other teams like, whether it's guys who are close to the majors or just trade for blocked players, et cetera, who might come cheap. Like, just try to stock your roster with interesting players who might be platoonable, might be, if they had, I'm not sure like what the state of their swing fixes are, but just if they have like a notion about a guy, like maybe not a push for it because they have so many roster spots to fill, especially like the rotation. I think that's the thing that's scary about the Michael Kopech thing is like, if he's not there, then what's the rotation next year?
Dylan Cease.
What can you count on for a White Sox? Yeah.
And Dylan Cease.
Pretty much, yeah. Dylan Cease. So like, that's the argument I think for like, if Kopech's out and Lance Lynn is, there's no thought of giving or exercising his option, like there's no rotation next year. So they can't really make a push for it all in 1 year. But in terms of like trying to make it fast or interesting, like I think having that middle lineup of Robert, Jimenez, and Vaughn is pretty much close to it because they're all around for at least the next few years.
Okay, so to that point, throw in Benintendi because he signed that 5-year contract as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you got four hitters that should be above league average for you. I can understand where you're coming from, Jim. Do you trust Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams to be able to implement the Milwaukee Brewers style of reloading?
Oh, God, no.
Now, Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams.
No. Okay. But I also don't trust them to rebuild, which is why this sucks. In terms of like this fixed front office is like there's no hope anywhere. When you go to the rebuild and waste 3 years of every fan's life with a promise to give it better, you can't play that card again. You can't make people excited about that again.
Right.
So yeah, I'm secretly hoping that somebody reads the writing on the wall and says like, we're terrible at this. I could, get paid close to the same amount of money and live where I want and not have to deal with this. So like, that's my hope with the White Sox front office to make some change that isn't Chris Getz. I'm not optimistic for that, but just this would be the kind of season where like something has to change. And if nothing changes, then I guess it's kind of the rebuild thing. Like, well, I guess you can never count on any change happening because a season this bad after the managerial search that landed the manager you want, and you put all your eggs in the basket of like, no, it's not the players, it's how they're being led. And turns out that's not the case. Like, yeah, it's all my, I guess, thoughts about 2024 are somebody else in charge. I don't think it's going to happen, but just, I like just being able to spend some time with the thoughts of having a different front office until it's proven impossible.
Kenny Williams 20 years ago, I would have confidence because he did.
Yeah.
That's what he did. Not quite quitting.
That was like 07.
Yeah. Not quite.
Like 07 when he had that like, oh, that's weird that you're acquiring John Dinks and putting him in the rotation. Like, it's a weird time to do it. And they lost 90 games, but just, it was a controlled burn a little bit. But then they came right back, regrouped with a better rotation, added some guys, Orlando Cabrera, Nick Swisher, et cetera, and like got back to the postseason. So like, that's kind of how I look at this. Is it seems like a controlled burn is called for. But yeah, it just.
Well, even didn't you get Freddie Garcia the year like 2004?
Yeah. So like it's a case where like you can start thinking about like who are you going to acquire for 2025 this year, with not having the huge trade chits that they had with Chris Sale and Jose Quintana and Adam Eaton and whatnot.
Right.
But Kenny 20 years ago, like he would make the trades. Rick Hahn seems afraid to make trades. Like he just really hasn't, ever since Lance Lynn, he really hasn't made one. Like that didn't involve like a busted player or expiring contracts or options being forced. Like Nick Madrigal was probably the closest thing to like a real bold trade, but like Nick Madrigal also couldn't play the rest of that year.
And Nick Madrigal's got more home runs than Tim Anderson now. Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, Rick Hahn really, I don't even know what he's doing around anymore. But Kenny Williams 15, 20 years ago, yeah, I would have confidence. Kenny Williams now, no, I don't.
Yeah.
But no, those are the good things, and hopefully these good things continue into the White Sox homestand as they do return from the West Coast, and they got 6 games against the Toronto Blue Jays and the St. Louis Cardinals. Jim and I are going to take one more quick break for a word from our sponsor, but coming up next, we'll preview the White Sox Blue Jays, the Sox Machine podcast. One reason why I hate buying tickets to anything these days is the waiting room. You know that feeling. You get the pre-sale code, and even if you got the pre-sale code and you log in, you're stuck in the waiting room with thousands of other people, not even sure if you're going to get a chance to buy tickets. Buying tickets to any event shouldn't be stressful, and that's why I've switched and used Game Time. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater shows near you. I use it to buy concert and theater tickets now. For Chicago events, you could use it. It's also great for Major League Baseball games as well. They have some killer deals, especially when it comes to White Sox tickets, as Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and you can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for the baseball games or any of the comedy and theater shows that'll be happening all summer long in Chicago. And what I really like about Game Time is that they have the Game Time guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's why it's one of the fastest growing ticketing apps in the country for a reason. So snag the tickets without stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app on your phone, either for Apple or Android devices, create an account, and use promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account on Game Time and redeem code SOXMACHINE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, the Chicago White Sox are back home. They'll be playing Tuesday night, 4th of July at 7 o'clock. So maybe you're doing some grilling, doing some barbecue. You could do that before the White Sox play. If you're going to the White Sox game, of course, you could watch the fireworks after the game, and maybe the White Sox hit many home runs in that game. You could see even more fireworks as they'll be playing the 4th, 5th, and 6th against the Toronto Blue Jays before the St. Louis Cardinals come to town, the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then it is the All-Star break. The Toronto Blue Jays, they are an interesting team because they're 45-40 on the season. They're 4th place in the American League East. They're 11.5 games back of Tampa Bay. So in Toronto, it's an uneasy feeling right now. This team should be playing better. They're still just 1.5 games back of the wild card, so they're in the playoff mix. They have lost their last 3 games. They got swept by the Boston Red Sox, and they are 5-5 in their last 10 games. This is what's odd about the Blue Jays and what's created an uneasy feeling north of the border. The Blue Jays are 7-20 against their division. They are having a hell of a time against their division rivals this season, but they are 38-20 against everybody else, including wiping the White Sox all over the floor in late April in Toronto, sweeping the White Sox in a 3-game series and outscoring them 20-2, which was like by far and away the most disheartening baseball we have seen this season from the Chicago White Sox. The pitch heat probables for this series. Toronto, Chris Bassett will take the mound, old friend, against Lucas Giolito. Wednesday night, familiar foe, Jose Barrios will make the start for the Blue Jays. Lance Lynn is the probable starter for the White Sox in that game. Thursday night, it's UC Kikuchi for the Blue Jays, and it'll be a bullpen day for the White Sox. Probably the Tanner Banks, Jesse Schultens combination. And then you have the series against St. Louis, which, as I mentioned, the White Sox are going to have 2 bullpen days that weekend because they're down to just 3 starting pitchers. This series has to go a lot better for the White Sox than it did in Toronto, right, Jim?
Maybe. I have.
It's got to.
It's got to. But I guess the way it could go better is they lose 2 out of 3, but to a better team. To where now that's normal. Like losing 2 out of 3 of the Blue Jays, there's no dishonor there, whereas there is for Oakland. The Blue Jays are fascinating to me just because when it comes to the White Sox, they seem like they almost self-regulate to hover around 10 games under 500, 12 games under 500, and just always look mediocre. Not, at least since April, not terrible, but mediocre since May. And, I guess mediocre would be losing a series to Oakland when you think they should win it. That's something that doesn't provide any hope whatsoever. Mediocre is losing the first game to the Angels and then scraping by with a split. And maybe it just adjusts for the quality of opponent to where they're not getting their doors blown off anymore, but they just look, mildly disappointing across the board. So I think the Toronto should be an interesting test case because they've been frustrating for their fans the whole year, never being able to put it together. They just lost 3 in a row to the Red Sox, right? So just when it looked like they might start climbing up the AL East, they're back down in the 4th place, behind the Yankees again. And with all the problems the Yankees are having, and Toronto still can't climb ahead of them. So there are some reasons why Toronto would look at the series and say yeah, of course we couldn't beat the White Sox, or of course we couldn't sweep the White Sox. I'm surprised that the Blue Jays are bottom half in homers. When you look at their lineup, look at all the power they have, look at the way they changed their fences, lowered them to theoretically accommodate more homers. They're still bottom half of the league in homers. Vlad Guerrero Jr. is having just a mess season. Matt Chapman is having a mess across the board, just a lot of blah. George Springer, another guy. If they put together, they could be sleeping giants. But in this case, if they're going to continue what they're doing, then that probably includes a disappointing loss against the White Sox that make them think, we can't put together even against the White Sox.
Well, I remember Matt Chapman had a fast start this season, and he has cooled off. Bo Bichette was also someone that had a fast start. But to your point, when Vlad Guerrero Jr. is not hitting at all cylinders, and he's not close to his all-star self, and I say this as a guy who's got 12 home runs this year and 52 RBIs and has an OPS of 792, the White Sox would love to have someone like Vlad Guerrero Jr. in the lineup. But, that's not what we expect to see from Vlad Jr. A 445 slugging percentage from Vlad Guerrero Jr.? No, that's not what we were expecting before the season. And, to your point, just looking at the home run totals, I am surprised that the Blue Jays lineup has not been hitting as well. And just looking at the last 30 days, and Vlad Jr. 772 OPS, that's pretty much on par. Matt Chapman hitting 211, 287, 378 in the last 30 days, the last 25 games for them. That hurts. Alejandro Kirk has been really struggling. He's been an impact bat before. I'm not even sure how Whit Merrifield made the All-Star team. That's shocking to me, but he's got the whole country of Canada behind him, and for some reason Canada loves to do online voting for things. So Whit Merrifield's an all-star, but in his last 25 games, he's got a 620 OPS. Just really bizarre. So you got an offense struggling the last 30 days against a pitching staff for the White Sox. I'm confident Lucas Giolito will pitch well. Not so confident about Wednesday and Thursday. I don't know what to make of Lance Lynn, Jim. And people keep asking me about Lance Lynn. And it's the only way I could sum it up is I'm terrified when he's facing a left-handed hitter. I'm a bit terrified when he's pitching out of the stretch. I'm expecting him to allow a back-breaking big inning, but he's going to go 5 or 6 innings because Pedro Grifol will have him and will push Lance Lynn to throw 100-plus pitches in his outing. And when you look at his final line, it's not as bad as it felt when either seen in person or watching on TV. Is that a fair explanation? Do you have the same feelings that I do when watching Lance Lynn?
Yeah, I'm more or less at peace with the idea that he's post-surgery John Danks, in that, like, he's going to qualify for the ERA title. He's going to be the worst, or he might be the worst qualifying pitcher in baseball. But it takes a certain amount of talent to qualify. Like, he's not the worst pitcher in baseball because, like, every worst pitcher in baseball doesn't throw 160 innings or 170 innings. Like, it takes a certain talent to get there. And with the bullpen games the White Sox have, and given the depths they've gone to try to preserve their relievers with, like, having Brian Shaw and Lucas Giolito ready to throw an inning, like, it's a case where, they kind of need that 5th and 6th inning from him when it's not going so well, or when it looks like it's not going so well. So he serves a purpose. It's a much more useful purpose when you have a whole bunch of other starters who are performing and he just helps cross a day off the calendar. Like, when on paper, like, the White Sox had like 4 starters with 3 win projections, based on how they performed in the first half, and like Lance Lynn bringing up the rear, but Lance Lynn's throwing 170, 180 innings. Like, that normally is great. If your 5th starter doesn't, like, make life harder for everybody else in the pitching staff, that's useful. But, like, when you're looking at him to deliver wins and stack wins and be a stopper, that's, I think, where it goes awry. And unfortunately, like, he's being paid like a frontline starter, but, either whether time has taken its toll or whether he just, has a very delicate pitch mix that, really needs refining, or to maximize it against lefties who can, smoke his fastball right now. Like, pretty much seems like, post-surgery John Danks, innings eater, crosses days off calendar. That's kind of how I'm treating him.
I was thinking more of James Shields, if you're going to go that route. I remember post-surgery John Danks did not have a very long shelf life, but, I mean, Lance Lynn's not going to have a very long shelf life either. I don't see the White Sox.
Yeah, James Shields probably the more contemporary reference. I equate John Danks with, like, having some hopes around him still and being paid a lot. I guess James Shields was too, for more rebuildy teams. But, yeah, either one works.
So what's impressed me is that for Lucas Giolito this season, pitching at home, he's got a 2.36 ERA. And opposing hitters are hitting 199 with a 242 on base percentage and slugging just 359 against Lucas Giolito at Guaranteed Rate Field. That's impressive to me on how well Lucas Giolito's been pitching at home, because it feels like he's the only one that's really pitching well at home for the White Sox this season. And again, the trade deadline is coming up, and the way that Lucas Giolito has been pitching for the White Sox, as I look up Lance Lynn's numbers at home, opposing teams are hitting 292, 348, 516 against Lance Lynn at Guaranteed Rate Field this year. He's got a 7.22 ERA. Oh man, I don't feel great about Wednesday. But with Lucas Giolito and the strong June that he has, there are some teams that may sell here, and now there's whispers out of San Diego that Blake Snell could be available before the trade deadline. Obviously, that would hurt Lucas Giolito's market. But I've got to imagine if Lucas Giolito could keep the Toronto Blue Jays at bay, and if he does make one more start, which he could the day before the All-Star break, if the White Sox don't give him that extra day off, or give him the extra rest, I should say, and he pitches the last game before the All-Star break, and he does a good job against St. Louis, I just wonder on how loud the drum beat is going to be nationally, Jim, because you have these 4 off days. There's stuff that's going on for National League Baseball, but the All-Star break is when things really turn up with trade conversations. I just wonder from a national level if the drum beat's going to get louder and louder and louder. Speculation about Lucas Giolito getting dealt before the trade deadline.
It should. I mean, like, he's back to his old form. Maybe not all the way back to when he was, like, throwing insane spin rate fastballs and the floating changeups. Like, there is a case where like he's just doesn't have that kind of velocity along with the spin rate that he had, and spin rate correlates with velocity, so it wasn't all sticky stuff. But he's back to being a guy who can go 6 and 7 innings. Is disappointed when he gets pulled from a game, like the guy you want starting a postseason game. So yeah, I don't know why teams wouldn't be interested in him. I could see the White Sox like, here's I guess a good case of Rick Hahn, like make a trade. Find something you like, go for it. He'll be tested here, but yeah, I mean, he should be attractive in the trade market, and the White Sox apparently are not going to make an effort to re-sign him. I think Bob Nightingale, right, was the one who said that. So that's pretty much Jerry Reinsdorf's thinking. And so, yeah, there's no reason to think the White Sox would probably think he's more worth the draft pick than trading him if they are still a dozen games under 500. And should they be like, 8 games under 500 and 3 games out, I think that's really going to be the Rick Hahn stress test. And just, can you make a trade? Can you be lured away from like salvaging anything from this rebuild? Do you have conviction in your trades rather than getting gun shy and saying we had very, interesting talks, but just couldn't quite find the thing we're looking for? Like that's, I think, going to be the fascinating part is 3 games out or so, what's he going to do? And if he does come to an idea of trading Giolito and does go through with it, like I'll almost applaud him a little bit for just like doing something, like having some conviction in the direction of the team, even if like I don't want him doing it. So yeah, it's gonna be tricky. One thing I'm watching with this series is looking at their roster and seeing this series on Fangraphs talking about top defenses and worst defenses. Outfield defense. The difference between the Blue Jays and the White Sox, they both have like great center fielders, but in the corners, like Dalton Varsho, the White Sox do not have a Dalton Varsho. And so like every time there's that kind of series, I'm always wondering, like, are we going to see like the Baltimore series from last year over again, like where they're just catching everything in sight and just you see the Goofus and Gallant in terms of comparisons between what the White Sox put in the outfield or what the White Sox believe is an outfielder versus what outfielders actually are.
It would help if they called up Oscar Colas, honestly, on Tuesday. And that should be the move. Clint Frazier doesn't have a spot on this team. He should not be with the White Sox. Send him back to Charlotte, call up Oscar Colas. I think that helps you a great deal. And Jim and I both agree on that. So maybe we'll get some good news on Tuesday that the White Sox announce. Maybe Rick Hahn announces before he speaks to the media that Oscar Colas has returned to the Chicago White Sox and be back in right field, because I know it's Charlotte and I know it's AAA, but Oscar Colas has been red hot, especially if you've been reading the daily minor league recaps that Jim's been writing on SoxMachine.com and checking out the highlight videos on Twitter and social media. Colas is hot, so go with the hot hand.
Yeah. And these homers are coming in Norfolk, not Charlotte.
Yeah. Good signs. Good sign. Yeah, Colas should be on the White Sox roster Tuesday. If he is not, I'm just going to throw my hands up and be like, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't. But I do know that's the end of this podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. I greatly appreciate it. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. I'm at SoxMachine_Josh. Those are also our Instagram handles. And we always upload the podcast into our YouTube channel, which you can check out those videos at youtube.com/SoxMachine. Programming note, I'm going to be out this week. I'm getting married. However, I spent some time with Jim Callis, one of our best friends of the show from MLB.com, to talk about the 2023 Major League Baseball draft. Expect that podcast episode to hit the feeds on Wednesday. We preview the draft, talk about the options that the White Sox could possibly go at pick 15. And we also had some terrific questions from our Patreon supporters that Jim was kind enough to really go in depth and provide his thoughts and insight on what is going on with the White Sox draft war room and even what's going on in the White Sox farm system as well. Again, that episode will be coming on Wednesday, July 5th. And speaking of Patreon supporters, if you enjoy our work and you want more, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get an opportunity to pose questions when we do have guests on the podcast. They also get exclusive content, ad-free versions of both the podcast and website, And when we have new Sox Machine swag, they're the first ones to receive it. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, known for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.